Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us tonight. I'm Danielle Daw. I'm the Adult Services Librarian here at the Halton Hills Public Library, and I will be your host for this evening. I'd like to acknowledge that the land on which the Halton Hills Public Library stands is part of the treaty lands and territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit. I also want to thank the Friends of the Halton Hills Public Library and CFEW Georgetown for their support of the Halton Hills Lecture Series. So we have a few housekeeping items just before we begin tonight. We will be doing a Q&A at the end of the event, and that will be taking place through the chat box. So for those of you who don't know, you can locate your chat in Zoom, either at the bottom menu on a computer, or usually it's kind of hidden a bit on a phone. But when you submit your question, we just ask that you direct it to everyone on the call, so that way everyone can see the questions that are being submitted. Tonight's lecture is being offered in partnership with CFEW Georgetown. So if you are a member of CFEW Georgetown, your meeting will follow the event, and you can just stay on the call for that, and we'll begin momentarily. Please also note that we are recording tonight's presentation, and it will be available on YouTube later this month. And with that, it is now my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker. So Lianne Harris has been a history, culture, and social studies resource specialist with Toronto District School Board for almost 20 years. Lianne really brings history to life. She blends history and theater for her presentations. And to date, she has presented to more than 80,000 students, teachers, and community members in the Greater Toronto Area. So in addition to her work at the school board, Lianne is the author of 2 medieval novels and several nonfiction books that cover topics related to South Asia, great women in history, and historical clothing and costuming. She's also been an exhibiting artist at the Royal Ontario Museum, Thomson Hall, the IDA Gallery, and the Shaw Festival. So now, without further ado, here is Lianne Harris.
Hello, everybody. I'm very excited about our topic today. It's one of those topics that I just wait and hope that people will ask me to present, because it is one of those mysterious topics. A cloistered society, a cloistered way of life that we are hearing about, but we may not be at all familiar with. So for tonight, I want to pull the veil back, as it were, on one of the most impenetrable places on the planet, and that is a Turkish harem. Now, when I say the word Turkish harem, I think that some of the things that pop up into our head might include, words might come up as oppression, or lots of women, one man, serving girls, dancing girls. I think that kind of comes to our mind, and we are going to find out whether these stereotypes are true or not. So without further ado, I'm going to pull back the veil, and we are going to enter into a Turkish harem. Let me pull up my slides. The Turkish harem, or Turkey, is part of what was known as the Ottoman Empire. And it's called Ottoman because the first sultan to start it was called Osman. And for whatever reason, Osman got corrupted to mean Ottoman, but it is from the same country. Europeans started to acquaint themselves with the mysterious East during the Crusades. Of course, these places existed before the Crusades, but the Crusades were a series of battles that took place over a few hundred years, pitting Western Europe with a more Christian ideology to the East, who could be either Jews or Muslims. And the original purpose of the Crusades was to make it a safe passage for pilgrims who wanted to go to the Holy Land. But over the times and over the different battles, it kind of it became a very muddled situation. And I wouldn't say that the Crusades were successful really at all, but what it did do was to allow two groups that would never have met each other to actually meet eye to eye. And when these two cultures would clash and size each other up, there were things that they did not like about each other, but there were other things that they really did like about each other. And a few things that the Europeans brought back to Europe from the Crusades that they did not have before would be soap, pajamas, and underwear. So that's a great thing. When the returning knights come home, they are then talking about their experiences over in the East. And this is going to then bleed through right up until certainly into the Renaissance and beyond, that Eastern styles are seen as exotic and are adopted by those who want to be perceived as well-traveled, or men or women of many parts. So these paintings in front of you are of Europeans, and yet the man on the left is wearing a turban. The woman in the center is wearing what is classically seen in Venice, Italy, but because Venice had such a correlation with the Arabic world, that's going to be a bit of a bleed over. And the man on the right is Italian, and he's not even trying to pretend that he is dressed as a Turk in Italy. Then from the Renaissance, it's going to be moved into the European courts to express patriotic feelings about colonialism. Of the two pictures here, the one on the far left is a British woman known as Lady Mary Wortley Montagu. That is not a Turkish woman. She was the wife of the British ambassador to Turkey. And we have to thank her because it was her eyewitness account looking at the Turks vaccinating against smallpox that she brought that observation back to Dr. Edward Jenner, who then created the smallpox vaccine in the 1790s. So she's instrumental at really helping to eradicate one of the greatest scourges of humanity. She herself had smallpox, and that painting is very kind to her because the artist has sort of airbrushed it out, but her face was actually quite pitted from the smallpox that she had as a young woman. Now, the British are over in the Middle East, and the British are also trying to control the Mediterranean because they have an enemy, and that would be Napoleon. So the British are showing their patriotism by starting to dress like Turks. Meanwhile, the French, who also want to take over the Mediterranean, fronted here by Napoleon, they're showing their solidarity by bringing to the French courts, again, this sort of turban idea with feathers, and the very dress that we might say is more Regency is very much what the Turks would wear. We have in the West a fixation with the exotic East. And this fixation and even reinvention of what we perceive to be the reality is called Orientalism. So Orientalism is where Westerners are depicting what they think is going on in the East. Now, in truth, many travelers were there noting their surroundings, but sometimes it has a little bit of a romantic overtone. You're going to see it exist in paintings and in books and in movies, like Abbott and Costello, who are lost in a harem and what Hollywood perceives it's all about, or the harem dancing slave girl there on the movie still on the right. There's this concept that it's all a big free-for-all, a moral free-for-all, where in these harems, it's just a whole lot of sensuality. And that is a fantasy world, especially in a depiction like this, where we have what looks to be a sultan or a man of some repute out on a street scene, and there are women who are dancing topless. It absolutely would not happen at all. As for harems, the European vision is one of naked girls daily dancing as they entertain their master. No, that's not really going to happen either. Or that there's lots of bored women who are just lounging around with absolutely nothing to do except eating Turkish delight and smoking a hookah or something. There is that other concept of bath time, because the Turkish baths were known to the French. And here's a painting that is quite famous in the Louvre by Jean-Augustin Gray, and he calls it the Turkish bath. And here we have all these women crammed in like sardines for their bath time, which is absolutely absurd. And yet, this is fueling the fantasy of what the Western man thinks is going on in a Turkish harem. And I'm sure they're quite jealous, thinking that this is what's going on. But the truth is that no European man ever got inside of a Turkish harem. So how would he know? He is only going by hearsay or rumor. The inside is really quite a different situation. But the one thing that was accurate was the talk that inside some of these great Turkish edifices, you would have steam rooms, plumbing, and indoor pools. So bathing was always important to the Turks at a time in European history when hygiene was really at low ebb. The Ottoman Empire is going to go from 1299 till 1923. And on this map, you can see that any country that is colored is part of the Ottoman Empire and would be swallowed up in due course. So it's more than just Turkey. It's going to expand into the Balkan countries, Greece, Albania, so forth, over into Russia, to the Crimean, down into the Persian Gulf, and skim along the north coast of Africa. So that is the full Turkish Empire or Ottoman Empire. Now you're thinking, oh, in my living room, I've got an Ottoman. How does that blend in with things? Well, that's one of their occasional pieces of furniture because they loved to lounge and they had pajamas. They had pajamas before the Europeans had pajamas. And part of it is to kick your feet up and relax, which was a bit of a shocking thing for some Europeans whose women would never show an ankle. All right, now what does the word harem mean? The word is actually harem, and it means sacred. That's what it means. So what is sacred to a man? His family is sacred to a man. And that means that you must protect the most important thing, which is your progeny, your family members, your potential dynasty. And it's going to be under guard, especially in times past when there really was a physical threat to your family. So a harem now is considered the women's quarters in a household. There are many cultures who had harems, but for today, we're going to just restrict it down to the Turkish model. The rooms are opulent and beautiful and excessively expensive to keep. Some historians and economists have kind of worked out what they thought the bill was to keep these harems going, and it seemed that it would suck back about 27% of the gross domestic product. So that would be greater than our government's putting into the armed forces or into weaponry. There are many windows. Yes, you want sunlight, but very few doors. And that's obvious that what few doors there are guarded because you're not going out. And likewise, people are not coming in. Now you want the sunlight, so there's lots of windows, but the sunlight or the windows are typically stained glass or lattice worked. So you can look out, but no one can really see you. And in large part, the outside windows are stained glass to the degree where you really can't see out. You can only look into the inner courtyard. And why is that? Because you don't want to be teased with something that you're never going to get. There are gardens around the harem, and these gardens are, I don't want to say, well, they're segregated. Okay, they're going to be women only, but there's also a pecking order on who gets to go into the garden. There will be public gardens that are for all the concubines, but some of the women who achieve status in the harem have their own garden or their own balcony. Turkish baths are legendary. The Europeans were talking about that. They shouldn't have been too surprised because the Turks were still using the plumbing system that the Greeks had put in that was sitting on, well, sorry, the Turks and then the Romans and then the Greeks and then the Trojans. So really for 2,500 years, there's been some plumbing going on, and they did bathe daily. So they had hot water being piped into this bathhouse or steam room, and they were very conscientious about any kind of communicable disease or fungus or athlete's foot. And so the women wore very tall shoes in the bathhouse. and this would elevate their feet above the water line, so their feet always stayed dry until they were ready to bathe. This is the inside courtyard of where the concubines live. This is sort of the dormitory. And when a new inductee is coming, she'll be brought here. Her dormitory is going to be on the ground floor, but those concubines who have achieved a little bit more status are going to be on the second floor. And for certain, they're going to be looking out the window. That would be clear glass, to see the prospective new crop of women, because those women are their competition. And it's pretty territorial in a harem that you hold your position. All right, now the big question is, who is inside? Well, beautiful and intelligent women are inducted into a Turkish harem in one of four ways. And the first is that they are family, that the harem is for all female members of the family, which would include your grandmother and your aunt and your niece and your cousins. Everybody who is female is in the harem, but because they are family, they will have separate quarters. They'll have their own apartments and their own staff. There's going to be a big age range in a harem. It can go from 99 right down to newborn. And yes, there are children present in a harem, because these women, not all women, but there's a great many women who are of childbearing age, and certainly the family members are going to be of childbearing age, so they have children. And in the harem, you're going to have nurseries of sorts. Nurseries, well, at least there'll be some education going on, and they'll have some tutorage. The next is that women are inducted because they are given as gifts by their family, that their father has gifted them to the harem in order to show good faith, to show that he's loyal to the cause. Now, these women alone have the greatest opportunity of leaving, because they were not hand selected, they were gifted. So as long as they stay virginal, and they will, typically, then they will be married out to officers or other high-ranking officials. But their loyalty will be with the harem, because the harem is the place that gave them their dowry, or that was home base in a sense. So very often they're married to officials or government people, but acting as spies to report back to the harem what their husbands are doing. And they alone are the only ones who can beg a favor from the harem, not their husbands, no matter their rank. It's those women who can come back and ask for something, which could be money, it could be jewelry, it could be something of a financial nature. The third is that women want to join the harem. Oh yeah, this is like winning a beauty contest. That the idea that you could be brought into a situation where you have great food, great medical care offered by trained female doctors, and that you have beautiful clothes means that your life expectancy is typically longer, your health is longer, and that's a whole lot better than living on a farm, working as a drudge, having 9 kids, and being worn out by the time you're 39. So they want to go, and they beg their parents to go, and they are groomed for that. The fourth way, which does constitute most of the way that foreign women find themselves in the harem, is that they are taken by force. And the Ottomans would go on successive raiding parties outside of Turkey, but all through the Balkan countries, all into North Africa and into Russia, searching for women who are fair, who are intelligent, and who are exotic looking to them. So what is exotic to them would typically be blonde and blue-eyed. And there was a slave trade in these days. And I know we typically think of the Black slave trade, which was likely the greatest or largest of the slave trades at that time, but there was a white slave trade going on. 3-4 million women were being trafficked at this time, but it was more invisible because they were all Caucasian. What the slave trade is based on was religion. It was Muslim to Christian. not skin color. Typically, the Ottomans would make deals. Well, first of all, they had their own raiding parties, but they can't be everywhere. So they would make broker deals with the Mongols or other tribal groups that if they capture women in a raid, bring them down and we'll take a look. And the greatest or most vulnerable time that a raid would happen is on Sunday morning. Villages were attacked on Sunday morning because everybody's in church. And that is perfect because the raiders would come. You got the whole community in one location. You can slaughter the brothers and the fathers. They're not going to chase you down. Grab the girls, you take off, and there's no one who will follow your trail. There are rules in a harem, and these rules are for the royalty. So the royals have to abide by 3 specific rules. And the first is that the Turkish Sultan, who is the king, cannot enslave one of his own subjects. That is against his Muslim religion. Therefore, there will be no woman in a Turkish harem who is Muslim who is there against her will, because that would violate his religious code. Everybody else is rather fair game. Now, this man here is Suleiman the Magnificent. And sometimes I've been asked that in the entire history of the Ottoman Empire, who was the top dog? It would be him. He was intelligent and he was wealthy and he was an active sultan who actually sort of led his country and led his army. He would be at the pinnacle of the Ottoman power. And he also has this rather spectacular headpiece known as, well, it's a turban, and it looks like a tulip shape, which is why the Turks love the flower, the tulip, because it reminded them of their sultan's headwear. The second rule for royalty is that the sultan cannot technically socially mix with his own subjects. Therefore, again, most of the women outside of his family in a harem are going to be foreign born. Now, they could have been brought in for those other reasons, but they will be likely foreign born. And the third rule, which of course was broken, was that a sultan can never legally marry any of these women. There is to be no marriage. And that is because they don't want one family sort of weaseling their way in there and having a power struggle. So there is to be no legal relationship between the sultan and his women. He's not even supposed to have favorites, but we know that was broken all the time. Of course, he had favorites, but marriage was another thing entirely different. Just because, however, there was not a legal contract between these women, there was an understanding that your needs would be taken care of in a Turkish harem at the most basic level. Consequently, all princes and future sultans are born to foreign slave women. And that is one of the most extraordinary things about the Turkish society, is that usually in royal households all over the world, the parents have to be royal born. The pedigree is very important. What's your genealogy on your mother's side? What's your genealogy on your father's side? But not in Turkey. The Sultan has the genealogy, but the mothers are unknown. They could have been taken in a raid. Who knows what their origins are? And that means that the Sultans are always going to be half Turkish and half something else, usually European of some sort. And that's why the Turks are so mixed up in their bloodlines. This, as I mentioned, is an unbelievable custom because every other culture that I can think of is obsessed about their impeccable genealogies. The reality is that harems are very organized with prescribed rules, obligations, etiquette, codes of behavior, and discipline. Discipline is kept on a really tight leash. Some women, in fact, never will lay eyes on their master. Yep, they can be brought into the harem, and maybe they were the ones who were gifted and not chosen, and they didn't get out to be married. And so they just exist. they might end up doing, I know it's not the most interesting thing, but they'll end up in the kitchen doing a lot of Turkish delight and rose petal jam. And I'm not kidding you. They have to find things to do. They could spend all of their life in a harem and never lay eyes on their master. And that is not a great position to be in, because you are neither bride nor mother nor concubine. Harems could be idyllic paradises. They were beautifully appointed. Your most essential needs were met, but they could also be hotbeds of intrigue and betrayal, because these are very territorial places. Now, here is where it all begins. And this is the Topkapi Harem in Istanbul. Modern Istanbul is, of course, sort of just on the other side of the Bosphorus, and there is the Topkapi palatial complex that will house the harem. Now, looking at this, there really aren't a lot of access points. There's not a lot of doors, just a door really on the far left side where you see the two turrets. But in there, where you see the trees and so forth, would be the gardens where some of the women could enjoy a little bit of a repast. This, however, is heavily guarded. And you're going to have two kinds of guards that are going to take control of the palace. There's the outside guards and there are the inside guards. But you'll notice that I put the arrows in different colors, because the inside guards are always black and the outside guards are always white. And this was deliberately done so that if you are a guard out of place, it's pretty obvious because of your skin color. The Vanangian Guard are those who are Caucasians, handpicked from Sweden, Russia, and Poland. They are the personal guards of the Sultan. So they stay outside of the palace complex, and they're the ones who will go to battle or be his sort of retainers. But those who are going to guard the palace inside, and by extension, the women, they're always from Africa. And they are handpicked to be from the Sudan, Ethiopia, Egypt, and Nubia. Those who are going to guard the women, who will be the Africans, are castrated. And they don't really fool around with this. There can be no hanky-panky. There can be nothing untoward. So these men are castrated when they are adults, because they need them to have the muscle mass of someone who's already hit puberty, but they don't want any fooling around. So here's how the Turks did it. They would grab you, and then they're going to dose you up with opium, lie you on a table, and with a very sharp knife, they are going to cut off your genitals. And there will be nothing. You will be just, it will just be gone. Then they're going to, after a day, put a reed, like a straw, into the man's urethra, and they're going to watch for his first urination. If it comes out as a stream, that's good. He's going to make it because his kidneys have not failed. There's no renal failure here. But if the first urination is a dribble, then they know that he is going through renal failure, and they'll just cut his throat. The blacks had a stronger constitution than the whites. Caucasians did not do well under these circumstances, and so their death rate was about 50-50, whereas the black cultures were stronger, and their death rate was about 20%. So that's why they were sort of separated that way. There is also, yes. Now, there are going to be two eunuchs, one chief white eunuch who is Caucasian and one chief black eunuch. And these two eunuchs kind of look after the household. So the chief white eunuch is Caucasian. I don't know why they seem to prefer Poland, but they did. And this man would have been castrated as a child. He would aspire to this. Even his family might aspire to this, because he is more like a butler or a steward. He looks after the paperwork and is essentially a secretary of state. So that's the chief white eunuch. But the most important is actually the chief black eunuch. And he has been castrated as an adult male. So he's strong, but he is of course, he cannot father children. And since he's in charge of the harem, he's in charge of the future dynasty. And this is a photograph of the very last chief Black eunuch in history. All right, so we go now into the harem because that's where we want to direct ourselves. There is a pecking order among the women. And you can see, because I put the font going from small up to large, what the pecking order is. So let's start at the bottom. I'm going to show you the terms, and then I'm going to talk about them individually. All right, at the bottom, you have the Odelisk. The Odelisk is the new recruit. She's brought in for whatever reason, and she would be the one who might typically never lay eyes on her master. But I put a bar across her name because she could be held down, but she might have an occasion to jump out of that. She has a bit of an opportunity, which we'll detail in a minute. All right, after the Odelisk, you have the Guzde. And after the Guzde, you move up to another rank, and that would be the Iqbal. And then from that, you move up to another rank, and that's the Kadeen. And then the top, which is the largest, is the Valide. So there it is, kind of as a bit of a glance. And now we'll look at them individually. The new inductees are the Odelisk. And this painting is also at the Louvre. It's quite famous. It's by the same gentleman in gray who did the Turkish bath. And it's ridiculous. He doesn't know what he's talking about, because an Odelisk would never be sitting around nude, fanning herself with a fan. She's a servant. When she's brought in, she's going to be picking up the dirty laundry of the Sultan's family. And she would be the one who may never lay eyes on her master. However, if it looks like she is good at music or particularly intelligent, or perhaps very, very beautiful, then she has an opportunity to change her destiny a bit. She can move up. The women are overseen by a female overseer known as the Kalfa. The Kalfa is in charge of training these new inductees on etiquette, how to behave, watch your P's and Q's. This is what we do. Here's your dormitory, keep your bed clean, all of this stuff. There are 12 Kalfas who are, again, in ranking order. And you know the ranking order of these female overseers by the height of their fez. The shorter, if it's like a skull cap, like a Juliet cap, that would be kind of the lower rank. But as she moves up, the hat will get taller and taller. The Odelisk, who is again the new inductee, might be chosen to be the babysitter for the other women's children. And maybe that doesn't sound like the most sensational job for the rest of your life, but that's okay too, because that means you're going to be working with the highest levels of those in the harem, the royalty. There's quite a bit of responsibility, and you will be compensated appropriately. All right, the new Odelisk comes in, assuming that she's not going to be the servant for the family and that she's intelligent. There are 4 departments that she will be trained in, and they are, as you see, perfume manufacture, cosmetic manufacture, sewing and embroidery, and confectionery making. You're going to stay in one of these departments for about 2 years, and you will learn that craft. Your overseer or your department head is the second from the top, the Kadeen. And these Kadeens they can be very jealous. They are extremely territorial. And many times you're working for them to perfect their recipes. You do not share these recipes. These recipes are not common knowledge because each woman is jockeying for position to make sure that she's kind of on top of the other. But they can be very heavy-handed. And if you don't learn the skills or the formulas, you could be beaten to some degree. But judging that you can work through each of these departments and be proficient, this is your ticket, because they want intelligent women in the harem. In addition to those 4 departments that you're going to take, 5 years to 7 years to sort of perfect, you do not want boredom in a harem. That is a recipe for disaster. You have to keep these women actively engaged. So there are lessons on the Turkish language, because most are foreigners. They don't speak Turkish. Also in other languages, because other women speak other languages. So you might become quite bilingual living in this harem. There's also religious studies of the Quran. There's court etiquette, reading and writing. And there are these schools or classes for these women, because there is a graduation. You are going to present yourself after all of your studies to the Valide. And the Valide is the queen mom. She's the principal of this school. And you better impress her, because there's no way she's going to let you sleep with her son and potentially bear her grandchild if you do not make the cut. She only wants the best of the best. And so you are actively pursuing a scholastic career in the harem. All right, the selection process. Well, the Valide, who is the queen mother at the top, is really the last word here. And she's the one that's going to be scrutinizing everybody. But assuming that you are now the Odelisk, you want to get to the next level, and that's the Guzde, and that translates to mean the favored one. The Sultan, or the master of the house, but in this case, we're going to say Sultan, doesn't live there. I mean, sorry, he lives on the premises, but he's not going to live in the harem. And you don't even know when he's going to visit. He could be gone for years, actually, if he's off in war. But then he might just show up, and you have about a 20-minute warning to get yourself ready. So yes, you always have to be in readiness. When he's going to visit the harem, you get a little bit of a notice to assemble, and it is just like rank and file in the army. All the women line up. They cross their hands like this over their chest, and they sort of look up like this. And they're not to make eye contact with the Sultan. That's too bold. That's very brazen. He wants everyone to look the same, so that no one girl could draw undue attention to herself. Like, whoa, look at me, look at me. Okay, can't do that. The women who are lining up in the harem, those who are not family members, have to compete with potentially 200 to 300 other women for this attention. And you might think that the attention is all to get the Sultan. It's actually to get the Valide. You must get the queen mother's attention, because she's the one who will recommend you. If the Sultan is just kind of going down the file, you know, looking at you, he has sort of that glazy, bland look on his face. But if he just for a moment pauses in front of you, just for a moment, then you have been marked. You are favored. And sharing his bed is assured. You just don't know when, but it will happen. So he'll go down the line, and he might just for a moment pause, and for a moment pause, and this is all noted. And then those who had the pause or the look are gathered up again for the semifinals. Okay, this is round 2. And this is where, I mean, eventually you are going to share his bed, but now it's just a matter of who's going to get there first. So the semifinals happens, and this time the Sultan will drop a handkerchief at the foot of the woman that he wants to share his bed with first. All right, now that you are going to share his bed, you are the Iqbal, you are the fortunate. And the preparations begin. You're not really sure as the woman when you are to present yourself, but you cannot present yourself until you have been, of course, prepped and trained on court etiquette, that your body has been all scrubbed and cleaned, you've been in the sauna, every hair has been removed, there's complete exfoliation, and you're also prompted on sexual practices. You're a virgin, you don't know this stuff, but that doesn't mean you are naive to it either. So you have to be taught how to please, what to say, because it hinges on this moment. Oh, for this moment, you are the belle of the ball, you're going to share his bed, but what if you fail and he never calls you back again? what a humiliation that would be. And everyone in the harem will know that you never got the call back. The day that the girl is going to be presented to the Sultan is quite an elaborate day. And part of that is the Queen Mother, the W.O.M.A.D, is going to pop out of nowhere with this enormous leather book. It's the size of a hotel registry, and she's going to record your name. And why would that happen? Well, you can guess, because she's recording your encounter with her son. So if a pregnancy ensues, it can be matched up with the date. If for any reason a woman is pregnant and the dates don't match, that is a terrible situation for her. If the dates don't match, then she could be executed. The jealousy and the competition is absolutely explosive during these selection processes. The women have to be kind of kept in line by the 12 kalfas, who are the female overseers, and the eunuchs, who are there floating around doing their job, and the W.O.M.A.D Sultan, or the Queen Mom herself. Now, those girls who are fools are going to be very jealous and spiteful of the girls who are chosen. And that's not going to be a good thing, because there's no escape here. This is like being in girls' high school for the rest of your life. But those girls who are more political and far forward thinking are going to think, okay, I never got picked this time. I might not get picked at all, but I will show favor or flatter the girls who are picked, because if their kite is going, I'm going to grab onto that tail and they're going to take me up with them. Now that her name has been recorded in the great book and all the preparations have been made, which could have taken a few weeks to this point, she is escorted with a parade of attendants. It is almost like a wedding parade or a wedding procession that will include the chief black eunuch at the front, then the girl in question. There will be 6 guards, her kalfa, because she's the one in charge who was her tutor, and there'll be some attendants. And then she'll take one corridor that is never used for any other purpose. It's called the Golden Corridor or the Golden Path, and that will lead directly to the Sultan's bedroom. The black eunuch, chief black eunuch, knocks on the door. On the other side is the Sultan's servant. The girl is brought into sort of an anteroom, and everybody withdraws. She is told or taught, do not look at him in the eye. You can never look at him in the eye. So your eyes are always downcast, and then you kneel and you take the hem of his garment and you kiss it 3 times. Only upon his permission are you allowed to look at him in the eye. And so rise when commanded and look at him in the eye. Now, the gifts and the rewards that are given to a new favorite, even just on that first encounter, are staggering. From this one encounter alone, even if he never calls her back, she will get typically her own apartment. She'll get an extra servant to now serve her. She'll get jewelry and gold threaded clothing, gem encrusted furniture, and personal effects. I could not tell you in this Zoom call how much she would get. I honestly didn't know there was that much jewelry in Turkey that would be given in the harem context. Now, a number of years ago, I read a book that is very rare. It's out of print. It was published in 1939, and it belonged to my great uncle. And it was called My Harem Life. And this is the actual autobiography of a woman who was from Russia. She was taken captive at the age of 17 from her Russian village, put into the Topkapi harem, and she existed there until the harems broke up. Then she was able to make her way to Paris, and that's where she lived for the rest of her life. And so she details as an eyewitness what really went on in a Turkish harem. So she says this: she was taken at 17. She had beautiful black hair and blue eyes and very white skin. And that was considered very exotic. She was very intelligent, and she got in good with the the Valid Sultan, or the Queen Mom, who was, of course, her great recommendation. But even with the Valide, it took her about 5 years before she actually was chosen to spend one night with the Sultan. From that one night, she received splendid jewelry. She says, my shoes, fans, collars around her capes, footstools, curtains, and room dividers were ruby, pearl, and diamond encrusted. I wore silks and furs, a new outfit every day, no repeats. I even got a personal yacht with 12 rowers, all in uniform, and 24-karat gold plated oars that she could use if, under escort, she wanted to go up and down the Bosphorus River. And she says that is not even a portion of what I received. Well, on that great day, when she was finally picked, for 5 years, she has never seen the Sultan. She's only heard about him from reputation. And the Valide is talking about her son and what a magnificent man he was. So she's pretty nervous about this. But she does say that the Sultan, I admit, underwhelmed me. I had expected so much. I had been in anticipation for over 4 years. But when I met him, he was shorter than me, with a bit of a belly, soft hands, and spent a good deal of his time talking about his favorite subject, and that would be European clocks. He had a pocket watch, and as it turned out, he was just as nervous as she was. Now, from that encounter, if a pregnancy ensues, you will be allowed to proceed with it because it was recorded in the book. If, however, you are ever caught pregnant and the dates don't match up, then you will be executed. There are moments when there was a court abortionist who would get in there if, for whatever reason, you were deemed unsuitable as a potential mother. If this woman has a girl, she will be called if the concubine has a daughter, the concubine will be called a haseki. If, however, she bears a son, she will be called a Kadeen. The Kadeens are the wife or childbearer. Now, there is no legal contract. You are not to be married to their women, but the fact that you are allowing them to bear your children is the closest approximation to a wife that you're going to get. And you are only second from the top. However, they're only allowed to have 4 Kadeens at any given time, and they have a ranking title based on when they are made the Kadeen. Naturally, they are second from the top, so there's only one position after this, and that's the Valide, and there can only be one Valide. So here is where there's going to be a lot of jockeying for position. The children of these 4 Kadeens are the ones who will ultimately be the next Sultan. It is supposed to go by ranking order, that the oldest Kadeen, who has the oldest male son, will be the next in line. But anything can happen in a harem. These are the women who enjoy personal slaves, apartments, their own gardens, their own balconies, in addition to absolutely resplendent wealth. If that Natisha Sultana, the one girl I just mentioned who spent one night with the Sultan, received all of that, then you can imagine what these women receive for bearing a child. However, among these 4 women, there is no place for friendship or confidences or trust. Why would you trust them? They're trying to take over your position. And each woman must secretly watch her back, because poison happens in a harem, and especially they must watch their son. They never leave that child out of sight, either their own sight or their caregiver, like their Odelisk, who kind of works for them, never unattended, because these other women may poison your son and put their own son into place. If the woman, the Kadeen, bears a son as the first pregnancy, then she stops. She cannot bear any more sons after that. It's 1 son per woman. If, however, the first pregnancy is a daughter, well, then they'll let her have another go. And if it's another daughter, okay, you can have another go at it until she reaches a son. Assuming, of course, that the Sultan likes her enough to want to sleep with her this many times. But you can kind of keep going through the daughters until you reach a son. But once a son is achieved, that's it. And that means that that son will be the savior of that woman. Because if anything happens to that boy, her place is nowhere. She has nowhere to go. It's worse than a demotion. So the mother looks after the son and the son looks after the mother. However, there are another group of women in the harem, and these are the sultanas. These are the sisters and the daughters to the sultan, not the concubines. The sultanas are, they have a lot of status. She has her own apartments, and in her own apartments, she has her own staff. These are separate from her husband's apartments. So the sister or the daughters are married, but they do not share the accommodation with their husbands. They are completely independent, and they are allowed to receive male guests as long as they are family members. Not only that, but those sultanas who have husbands, those husbands have to strictly maintain their code of behavior, in that there can be no infidelity. Their husbands can never take other women, only them. There can be no favorites, there can be no wives. So her staff is her staff, not his staff. He's a lone wolf. And the reason that he cannot have any women is because the Sultan, her brother or her father, can be the only one. Just like a lion pride, there can only be one lion, and he will be the father of that dynasty. Everyone lateral is going to have to shrink. This is a great and very accurate portraiture of a sultana. They like their women bigger. There's no doubt that the Turks liked their women with some flesh on them. They would find our typical belly dancers today very skinny and unattractive. What they liked was 3 visible rolls of fat and a deep set navel slightly turned to the right so you can put a jewel inside of it. Now the Valide is the Queen Mother, and of course I have mentioned her. This position is absolutely majestic. It is powerful, it is political, and she is untouchable. She is the ultimate queen bee, and there is no approximation in a European royal household that would equate the Valide. Queen Elizabeth has no power compared to this woman. This is a woman who knows every trick in the book because she has risen to the top in the harem of the of her husband, of the Sultan's rule. So there's nothing that she doesn't know. And the very word Valide Sultan means the veiled crown. And that is most accurate. These women ruled the country from behind the veil. Upon her son's ascension, when her boy becomes the Sultan, she has complete control of the harem and the members of this dynasty. She's in charge of this family. All the eunuchs report to her. The chief black eunuch especially, because she has 100 spies or personal servants who are out there gathering intel, feeding it back to her, and there is nothing that she doesn't know. Every little thing that you might imagine would be of little account, like somebody stole a ring, or these 2 concubines don't get along with each other. She knows it all. She's often the referee in disputes. No concubine can leave or enter the harem without her permission. Sometimes they are allowed to leave under escort, but it's up to her to decide if you will. She's the one who will regulate the relations between her son and his Kadeens. She picks the women. And as I mentioned, she wants to pick the right ones who will bear the grandchildren that she will approve of. She's even the one who will pick who he will sleep with after Ramadan. That falls to her. So she picks these women in large part. And her son will not interfere. I don't want to say that they're mama's boys, but they kind of are in this way. This is her dominion, and he is hands off here. He respects his mother's authority in all respects when it comes to the harem. She has power over the concubines that will extend to questions of life and death. She has the power to execute within the harem if she is particularly displeased with you. Although it would take more than just displeasure, it would take an unexplained pregnancy or treason that will get you executed. Murder. She finds out that you've murdered. That will get you executed as well. She's responsible for the harem's finances. She is the one who looks after the payroll. The money comes to her, and then she divvies up the allowances to everyone and makes sure that this thing is going on. So she's the chief financial officer of the harem. And she is essentially going to rule her son and the kingdom behind this silken veil. These are women that nobody sees, and they're the ones in charge. Being favored by the W.O.M.A.D gives validation to your life. This is the essential edge to survive. You will never survive in this harem without her good graces. And you might think that had you been inducted into a harem that you would never grovel like that her validation just couldn't be that important. But it is true that there's a fundamental change that happens in such a controlled environment where it does matter. As shallow as it is, it really does matter. Now, for the Kadeens, who are the 4 women who are second in ranking order, there is no other ambition or thought or desire than to be this woman. And only one's going to make it. And their entire life revolves around attaining and plotting for this most coveted position. Now, our young woman here from Russia, Natisha Sultana, who was taken as a captive and who escaped from the harem, or was essentially released, I suppose, she was in a real predicament in this harem because the W.O.M.A.D favored her. Good. But the W.O.M.A.D did not like another woman in the harem who had been a Haseki, who had borne a daughter, but now that daughter has died. And the W.O.M.A.D basically said, that woman's useless. She's a freeloader. She's outlived her usefulness. Why are we maintaining her? She doesn't even have a child anymore. Why don't you go poison her? And so Natisha here is really in a conundrum because she's thinking, what am I going to do here? If I poison the girl, then I'm going to be a murderer. And the W.O.M.A.D knows I am capable of murder, and she might kill me. On the other hand, if she does nothing about it and will not poison that girl, then the W.O.M.A.D knows that she's not responsible or trustworthy, and she knows the W.O.M.A.D's deep, dark secrets, and that might get her killed as well. But what frustrated her more, what appalled her the most, was that she was even thinking about poisoning another woman. All of your moral compass can be kind of skewed when you're in this harem. As it turned out, the situation took care of itself because the woman in question ended up falling from a balcony to her death, although in large part we believe she was pushed. Real W.O.M.A.Ds and their extraordinary lives. So there are 3 that I want to cite. The first is named Harem, although her birth name was Alexandra. And she was born in Poland, but now what is part of the Ukraine. She was taken in that Sunday morning raid when she was at church. Her family was, anyone who tried to follow her was slaughtered, and she was sold into the Topkapi Harem. But she was sold into the harem during the time of Suleiman the Magnificent, and she caught his eye. And no one's quite sure how she did it, because the harem was probably at its greatest at that point. But some say she called him by name. When he was doing the inspection, She called him by name, and he was so shocked by that he looked at her and kind of took a shine to her. So she was Alexandra by birth. She was brought into the harem and renamed Roxelana, and then he named her Harem Sultan. She is the undisputed favorite of Suleiman the Magnificent and bears him 6 children and 5 sons. She just blew the whole quota. And this is how she did it. She looked around the harem and realized that most of the women are Christian, because this was more of the, this is really how they were brought there, because you can't enslave a Muslim woman against her will. And so she thought, okay. So she said to Suleiman, I would like to become one of the faithful. I would like to be a Muslim. Can I do that? And he says, yeah, that would be great. So she goes through all of her lessons and she becomes a convert. He's thrilled. And then he, just wants to kind of pick up as usual and say, hey, honey, let's go to bed now. And she goes, no, I can't. Allah forbids it, that I cannot sleep with a man who is not my husband. And he realized, drat, didn't quite see that one happening. But he does set her free, makes her a subject, turns around and marries her. First time ever that this code was broken. She was very involved in political matters, had a lot to say about international matters, which would outrank her than any other of his council at court. She's a very controversial figure. In the Ukrainian Eastern Orthodox Church, she's actually considered a saint. They want to beatify her because she did a lot for humanitarian and charitable purposes. But on the other hand, when she came to power, there were already 4 Kadeens, and she'd be the 5th. So she can't join that group. So sort of ironically, one gets eliminated and that son dies. So there has always been a bit of a shadow of murder attached to her. We'll never know. I don't want to say she was. It's just strange things happen in a Turkish harem. The next is Kozem. Now she's Greek and she was born Anastasia. She was the daughter of a Greek Orthodox church on a small island off, like in the whole Greek Isles, called Tinos. Her father, being a scholarly man, wanted his daughter to be educated. So he sent her over to what would be Bosnia, I guess, for her education, but her ship was captured by pirates. And they took a look at her and thought, she's 15, she's Greek, she's a virgin, and she's educated. This is pretty good. So they sold her to the Topkapi Harem. And she will be one of the most powerful women in Ottoman history. She will control the throne on 3 occasions, through her son, through her second son, and then through her grandson. She was allowed to have more than one son, obviously. She actually bore 7 children. When she was sold to the harem, the Sultan at the time was the same age that she was. He was only 15. So they're both 15-year-olds, and he probably had a bit of a soft spot for her because his mother was a Greek slave. She's the one who will direct all the affairs of the country behind a veil. She literally brought what would be a shower curtain into the court to cover her face, and then she would sit there and direct out all the mandates. And the third is one of those stories where truth is truly stranger than fiction. And this is the life of Ami Riveri, who was from the islands of Martinique in the West Indies. When she's brought into the harem, she'll be renamed as Naksh, which means the beautiful one. And that's no small thing because these are beautiful women. So here's in brief her story. She is a French girl whose father has a French plantation in the West Indies on Martinique. And she grows up there with her best friend and cousin. When these 2 girls are 14 years of age, they are sent over to Paris, France, to a nunnery or to a convent to have their education, their fine French education. That happens. Now they're both 18 years of age and they sail home, but they take different ships. Her best friend and cousin got back home, but her ship was taken over by pirates. And she, of course, matches exactly what they want as far as a captive. She's blonde, she's blue-eyed, she's educated, she's French, she's a virgin. And so she is inducted into the harem. She will bear the Sultan's only son, and then that Sultan dies. And that will overnight make her untouchable. She becomes the Valide. But she was a very sensible and enlightened and intelligent woman. But you can imagine the shock of this girl who has come from a cloistered French nunnery into a harem. Now, mind you, she's used to that kind of convent experience, but nothing could prepare her for the intrigue or even that sexual side that she would have to adopt. She's the one who brought French culture to Turkey through her son Selim. And she was a very wise counselor to her son. But here's the thing. This is the time of Napoleon. And Napoleon is trying to take over the Mediterranean. He wants to dock his ships in Turkey. So he deals with her son Selim. Selim says, okay, Napoleon, you can leave your ships here. But then Napoleon divorces Josephine Bonaparte. What's the connection? Her best friend and cousin is Josephine Bonaparte. And she was so angry that what would be her cousin-in-law, Napoleon, has divorced and humiliated her best friend and her favorite cousin, that she says to her son, Selim, you tell Napoleon to take his ships and go. And Napoleon couldn't figure it out. He lost the whole campaign. He was never able to get back into the Mediterranean like he thought, never knowing and never having a clue that the real power was, in fact, his cousin-in-law. Now, what about the sons who live in these harems? Well, if you have a boy, he's going to be living in a harem. What happens to him? Well, you can almost divide the Ottoman Empire in half, and it starts to break down about 100 years after Suleiman the Magnificent. So around a little bit later, maybe the early 1700s, it starts to kind of take a downward spiral. When the boys hit puberty, they cannot stay in the harem. So then, before the 1700s, they were shipped out and tutored in schools where they would learn all about statecraft. However, there was the feeling that they would be too influenced or that they were corruptible, or maybe the Turks just got lazy. But for whatever reason, after the 1700s, they left the males in the harem, but they put them under or into something called the kafes, or the cage. It's the golden cage, and it is literally solitary confinement. If you are there, you can have concubines visit you. You can even establish a relationship or have a family, but you can't leave this apartment. And you are waiting there, never really knowing if you're going to live or die. You're not out in the country. You don't know the affairs of your country. You have very poor political aptitude, and you're just kind of waiting to know what happens to your father. Because if your father is taken over by a political coup, the day your dad dies means the day you're going to die, because you are in the gilded cage. If, however, your dad dies of natural dies naturally, natural causes, oh, then you can breathe, because that means you're going to live, and now you can be the next sultan. But this change of policy, keeping them in what would be solitary confinement, had a very negative effect on the quality and abilities of the later Ottoman sultans. However, presuming that you make it through, your father hasn't been murdered, then the moment you ascend the throne, you're going to want to kill your brothers. You kill all your half brothers. That's why when you grow up with them in the harem, you're not nicey nice. You don't play with them. You might go to school with them, but this is like a lion pack here, and you're going to have to control this pride. So yes, the sultans always executed their half brothers. The harem is a result of seclusion laws in Islamic societies. But there are three things to consider here. That besides the above average living conditions, which is food, clothing, and medical, it did serve three important functions for the majority of the female residents, those who did not have such grand aspirations. First, it was a true physical protection in a turbulent world. You really could be attacked, your place could be under siege, so this was true protection. Second, it is companionship with other women who are all generally at your same, socioeconomic level. This is important for women in royal circles. So there were more than enough girls in a harem to find friendships. And thirdly, it gave women within the opportunity to govern themselves. The Sultan had very little to do with the harem. It was the women who operated, work out all the manufacturing, who have the schooling, who do the tutoring. The doctors are women, and the Valide is, of course, the chief financial officer of the harem. So this is their own world that they look after and protect. But for those who were more ambitious, of course, the idea was to govern the empire through their sons. And for these ambitious women, survival in all aspects of the royal household will exert all of your power of stealth, cunning, dominance, and intrigue. It is exhausting that you will have to be attuned to that for the rest of your life. The end of the Turkish harems. Well, what happened to them? Are they still around or not? The imperial Turkish harems disbanded in 1923 when the Ottoman Empire officially collapsed after World War I, and they did it to themselves. After World War I, they had, an awakening, like so many other countries will, as to we really don't need to do it that way anymore. And Kemal Ataturk is the one who said, this is old school. We're in a new age. We move forward. And so on this day in 1923, he literally sent his soldiers into the harem. They bashed down the doors. They just went from room to room as these women are scurrying around, and they would just say, you, out, like you're gone. Take your possessions and go. Now, many of these women had no idea where they're going to go. They don't have a suitcase to even put their things in. They did not expect that this would happen to them. So if you are at the lower level, like the Odelisks or the ones who were never really favored, you're out on the street with the clothes on your back. For those who had some rank and status, they would grab their jewels or anything of value, put them into the pillowcases, and they end up on the street with these pillowcases full of their goods that they would flee with to Berlin or Paris, and they would pawn them for the rest of their lives. Some of these girls, however, would try to find their way home, but they found that when they went home, you could never go back. You could never go back, and that life was something that would change you, and so you have no other opportunity but just to pick a new life for yourself. I suppose the question is also, are harems gone? Do they exist today? Yes, they exist today. There are cultures who have them legally and who have them illegally. And if we think that it always happens somewhere else, just remember when Hugh Hefner was around and he had the Playboy mansion with his Playboy bunnies. That is, in a sense, a perfect example of a modern harem. So thank you so much as we've explored this topic. I hope it's been somewhat enlightening for you. And if you have any questions, then, we are running a little bit late though, but if you have any questions in the chat box, I could take a quick look. And I did.
Thank you very much, Lianne. If anyone does have a question, feel free to quickly pop it in the chat. We can do one or two before we kind of end up. My question actually, because you've kind of touched a bit on what happened with the women with very young sons. And I was just wondering if there was ever a situation, or if what you were kind of alluding to in one particular example was that the women could have power if their sons say, were 2 or 3 or 4 when their fathers passed away? Like, what kind of happened in situations like that, where the son who might be the next sultan was incredibly young when his father passed away?
Yes. In that case, then the mother is going to take control. She will take control because she is banking everything on that son. So even if the father dies early, she's going to jockey for position to be his regent, but she will not let that go. And that's why the one sultana, the one valide named Kozem, she ruled through 2 sons and a grandson. Now, the grandson was the problem because that son would have a mother. That would be her daughter-in-law. So now you have the grandmother and the daughter-in-law trying to jockey for position. And it actually didn't end well for her. She was strangled by her own hair by her daughter-in-law. But they will not give up that opportunity. That's what they live for.
Interesting. Yeah, it kind of seemed from some of the stories, I was getting the sense that, yeah, sometimes they might be quite young when the fathers passed away. So that's interesting to see how they could take control.
Yes, like the last one, the one from the West Indies, she was 18. She came to the harem at 18. She had the baby by 19. So she was the valide by the time she was 20.
Yeah, and I see. So maybe we'll go with this one first. Contents in. Someone's asking, how did they view multiple births, especially the multiple sons? How did that kind of work out?
You mean twins or just multiple? Okay, I'll deal with both. Technically, you are only to have one son. So once you have the son, you're good. The Sultan is under no obligation to visit your bed again because you have born that son. Only in the rarest circumstances, as cited, could some of those women have more than one son, but those are the anomalies. If they are twins, that gets complicated. Twins are actually not, in some cases, desired because there will be that competition for the throne, but it goes basically into the first twin out, that's the firstborn. Whether that brother will stage a coup later on, who can say? Because they're blood brothers, you will find them closer than the half brothers, who are always viewed as competition.
Yeah, and then the other question that come in here was just asking, do you know how women in modern Turkey, or maybe just society in general at this point over there, kind of perceives this part of their history?
Oh, I think they see it as what it was, a time that came and went. I don't believe that they look at it with disgust or embarrassment, not a bit. I think they just see it as that was then and this is now. Because as we delve more into the power behind the Ottoman Empire, a lot of it was yielded by the women. So they are content with that. Modern Turkey has very liberated women. So I think that they kind of perceive it as sort of equal but different.
Yeah, and the question that's just come in here is said, on that line, was there no revolt by males in government over the power that was held by these women?
Yes, yes, they didn't hold on to it easily. That in the case of the second woman, Kozem, the Greek woman, who had the 7 children and who ruled through her first son, then her second son, then the grandson. When her second son, okay, so let me just backtrack. The first son was an alcoholic. And because he was an alcoholic, he was at times incompetent. So she took over, and she was fine taking over. She wanted to take over. So she just kind of pushed her son aside a little bit anyway. The second son did have mental challenges. He was considered mentally incompetent. So she pushed him off to the harem, said, here, just go to the harem, have fun. And she took over. But because he was persuadable, the men in the court and those in opposition were feeding him to go against his own mother. So mother and son are against each other. And she eventually ordered the execution of her son, because in her opinion, she has to stabilize the country. And he is a traitor to that country. So she's the mother, but she is first the Sultan, and she will take over as needs be. So yes, these women had a hard time holding that power.
Yeah, and somebody else has just asked just kind of how widespread harems were. So was there, just kind of one or two main ones, or was this more widespread where a lot of men were in situations where they might have these households?
You mean in other countries? I take it? Is that?
I think we're just clarifying about the Ottoman Empire.
Okay, so if it's the Ottoman Empire, the Sultan will have the greatest of the harems, of course, because that's very politically based. His his son-in-laws cannot have harems. Okay, so the women who are his sisters or his daughters, their men do not have harems. However, a harem is a little bit different than a polygamous situation, because in a polygamous situation, to which many Turkish men, lived by, you may have multiple wives, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to keep them indoors all the time, that they are restricted this way. But there would be smaller harems, very much smaller harems to some of the high-ranking officials, but they would always be much smaller than, of course, the main one, because this is the dynastic carry through for that country. So to answer your question, yes, you will have polygamous situations where a man might have up to four wives, but they don't wield the kind of control that the Topkapi harem of the Ottoman Empire did.
I imagine it would be very expensive if you had multiple people trying to do what you just kind of laid out for us tonight with all the jewelry and accessories.
Yeah. It's not. It sounds more romantic than it is, but you have to be excessively wealthy to maintain women, and if you are wealthy to that degree, the Sultan has his eye on you, right? So you can't step out of bounds, or else your family's going to pay for it.
And then I guess just kind of as a final question then to wrap it up, would you mind maybe just commenting a bit on the costume that you brought tonight? I noticed at one point you were telling us kind of with hand motions about the height of the cap.
Yep. Sure. Okay. So yes, the fez is kind of worn by men and women, but starting at the lowest. If it's on the women and it's more of a little pillbox shape inside of the harem, that is the, a lower ranking. And as you go up and up, then the fez gets taller and taller. So the valide could wear a fez like this. It's about this high. It had kind of this, it could be kind of a funny shape. I mean, they lasted for 700 years, so the style is going to change. But yes, the higher the fez, the more regal or higher your status. The shorter the pillbox or the little skull cap, the lower the status. Lots of drapery. In a harem, the more clothes, in a Turkish harem, the more clothes you have, the wealthier you are. They had layers and layers of fabric. Never think for a moment, please, that they're running around in a belly dancing outfit. They would have Turkish pants or harem pants. They had blouses, they had vests, they had different drapery off their fez hats. Their bodices kind of come right under the bust, a little bit like the Regency period. And their sleeves were actually 3/4. So it would be 3/4 and then this kind of drapery. So they were very light. Lots of money put into their clothes, silks, satins, embroidery. But yes, you would think by our standards that they're overdressed. they're just kind of poofy because they've got so many layers. Only the poorer you are, the less clothes you have. And robes, capes with fur collars. That if you had sable, if you're allowed to wear sable, you're in the royal household. What else? Yep. Well, you can just see from all the jewelry, there's no such thing as too much bling. That's for certain. And makeup and perfume. They did okay as far as luxury goods.
Yes, they seem to have been in a good position for the time that they were living in. As you said, it did span about 700 years.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you very much, Lianne, for joining us tonight. On behalf of the Halton Hills Public Library and CFUW Georgetown, I do want to formally thank you for coming and for bringing that wonderful costume as well.
You're most welcome. It's been a pleasure.
And just for the audience, if you enjoyed tonight's presentation, this was part of our Culture Days promotions here at the library, and there's lots of events happening across the province. So check out culturedays.ca to see what else is happening in case there are more presentations like Lianne's that you might be interested in. Right, so at this time, if you're a CFUW member, you can stay on the call and your meeting will begin momentarily. And then I'd just like to once again thank Lianne very much for coming tonight. And I'd also like to thank the sponsors, CFUW Georgetown and the Friends of the Halton Hills Public Library. So thank you very much, everyone, and thank you for joining us, and please enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you all. I'm going to bid farewell. It's been a pleasure. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thanks, Lianne.
You're welcome.